and welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast, authentic chat about medicines, pharmacy and healthcare in the UK.
Pharmacists Jamie, Gimmo and STC take on topical and controversial stories but keep it edgy yet light-hearted.
Pod guests share their career-defining drug, song and book, and also share their joyful patient stories.
Welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast. My name is Jamie Hayes. For this episode, we're looking at the impact of pharmaceuticals in our rivers and waterways, and we're joined by Professor Alistair Boxall. Alistair is an environmental chemist based at the University of York. We will welcome Alistair in a moment as he shares a drug for our formulary, his career anthem, and recommends a book for the Oral Apothecary Library. Our micro-discussion this week, well, we'll see where we get to. Let's welcome my two fellow apothecaries. STC is in Bournemouth and Gimmo is in Cardiff.
Evening.
Evening all. New microphone for me. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. If you've just picked up listening to the last episode with Brian, sorry, possibly the worst audio that we've ever had. Not Brian's fault.
81 episodes and you've invested in a new microphone.
I know, yep. One less pill has come good.
There's that cost-effective gene clicking in, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
So talking about cost-effectiveness, last week, James, I was up at Toyota in Deeside, the engine manufacturing plant. Have you been up there?
I haven't, but one of my nephew works there.
Oh, does he?
Yes.
What's he do? Well, anyway, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah.
But
I've been on the list to go and visit a few times with Welsh Government, but never quite made it.
Yeah, no, that was who we went up with, was this Welsh Government do a partnership with them. But yeah, my brother-in-law said, what on earth can the NHS learn from a car manufacturing plant? But I think probably quite a lot, to be honest. So, the jury's still out a bit on lean in the NHS, isn't it? But
total quality management, isn't that Toyota?
No, that's before. That was before Toyota. That was the Toyota production.
It's the Toyota
system.
production system and lean methodology and stuff. But I mean, the take home for me from up there is the culture up there and how they empower frontline staff, and that's, I think, something we've talked about. So yeah, I'd recommend it. It was a good visit. I've been to a few places like that, and yeah, it was good. What you been up to, Steve?
Well, I just wanted to shout out Jamie again in relation to his TED Talk. You know, we've talked about this, and you've just racked up 80,000 views, Jamie.
80, is it?
Yeah, just coming up to 80,000.
I've stopped looking.
Imagine, Jamie, if you actually wrote a social media post about it. Imagine what you could do.
Like a blog on the Oral Apothecary Podcast website.
Instead of leaving it to me and Steve.
I've stopped looking. But
I know,
interestingly,
it'd be a thing, wouldn't it?
The Women's Institute have been in touch. So
Oh, you have made it.
and have booked me for several public workshops. So that's good, because it's appeared in one of their catalogues, their monthly catalogues, I think.
This is when the big bucks start rolling in.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to highlight listeners to it. And given that we're going to be talking about one of the subjects that featured, I thought it was really important to pick it up. And I've been following it with interest in relation to the comments. And there have been so many lovely comments, but this one really hit me this week. He brings a kind of quiet urgency to the topic.
Here we are. Thank you. It will come up because Alistair was instrumental in some of the stuff that I presented. But I wanted to share, look, Tim Albert, for those of a certain vintage in the pharmacy and medical worlds, they may remember attending training courses on how to write a paper and get it published by Mr. Tim Albert back in the day. And so I'm one of the few remaining trainers left standing. And so I delivered an online workshop last week, one of Tim's workshops, to 10 specialist registrars in Leeds. And so I thought I would, give myself an advert. The course is available, but also a shout out to Tim and his work, that he's retired, it's still going, and still as impressive as ever. And then I've got a shout out, look, to a long-time supporter of the podcast. She's been to our live public shows as well. Steve knows her very well too. Sarah Cripps, podcast host of The Big Balance, has just passed her coaching exams with a distinction. And so congratulations to Sarah. Again, she supported the podcast from the start.
She has.
And so really well done.
Congratulations.
Very good. Okay, let's move on. Our great pleasure to welcome Professor Alistair Boxall to the Oral Apothecary. As I mentioned, an environmental chemist based at the University of York, he spent 20 years exploring the occurrence, effects and risks of pharmaceuticals in the natural environment. He co-led the global pharmaceutical monitoring project that investigated the occurrence of a range of active ingredients in rivers from 104 countries around the world. Welcome to the podcast, Alistair.
Good evening.
Very good. Welcome. I will just continue the conversation from earlier because Steve mentioned the TED Talk. But look, this is who Alistair is, okay? I'd read his stuff. I'd followed him online. I'd read his interviews. I emailed him cold and said, "Hi, Professor Boxall. I'm doing a TED Talk. I'd like a strong finish on medicines in the water." And he gave me all he had. He said, "Here we are, Jamie. Here's all my stuff." Not all of it, not 20 years worth, but he honestly, it was so generous of you, Alistair. It helped enormously, and so thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That was great. So, Alistair, tell us a bit about your work and why you would end up on a podcast like this.
Yeah, so I guess I've been working on pharmaceuticals in the environment now for, well, you said I think 20 years when you opened. It's actually 25 years, frighteningly. So I sort of started in the late 90s looking at veterinary medicines, and then slowly evolved into looking at human medicines, and now I'm sort of looking at both human and veterinary medicines, and I'm very interested in the occurrence of medicines in the environment, so in rivers, soils, interested in what they do to organisms in the environment, and then sort of also increasingly what they do to us, either directly or indirectly.
And so what's the link then between, how much of our world do you get to experience and see? We'll come on to your world in a moment, Alistair, but how much of our world do you stray into?
I guess increasingly, I sort of get into the pharmacy world quite a lot. I mean, what's interesting is that I actually wanted to be a pharmacist when I started. Unfortunately, I didn't work very hard during my A levels, so I didn't get the grades, and I didn't make it. So I ended up getting into Leicester Polytechnic on clearing.
We'll make you an honorary pharmacist. We'll have a few words, Alistair.
And work hard, kids, for all you listening out there.
Yeah, otherwise you could end up as a professor.
Yeah, I was going to say, you haven't done too badly. And I'm known as STC, Steve the Chemist. But actually, you're a real chemist, so you could be ATC, couldn't you?
Yeah, but I bet you didn't get an E at A level.
Well, it depends which subject you're talking about. But just while we're on the topic, because I'm the kind of person that looks closely, your parents must have had a bit of a sense of humour, because your titles are A, B, A, B. So your middle names. Surely there's a story to that.
Yeah, my father's definitely got a sense of humour, but I'm not sure that came into the initials. Yeah, the B is Bruce. So
okay, so it's like a jumbled up version of ABBA.
That's right. Yeah. Well, my father was a priest, so.
So, Alistair, who are the stakeholders in for our sort of lay audience in particular? But who are the stakeholders in your world? You're testing rivers and waterways and soil. Who's interested in this stuff?
A lot of people. So it's everyone from people like yourselves. So I think the pharmacy community are getting more and more aware about the impact of drugs in the environment. The companies. So we work quite closely with a lot of the big pharma companies. The regulatory authorities, so people like the Environment Agency, at the global level, sort of UNEP. And then the public. It just seems to be a topic that the public are fascinated about. And when I go out and talk in public events, they're really interested in what we're doing. And I think it's something that they've never really thought about. They don't make the link between the medicines they're taking and what we find in the river. They don't really think about what happens to the drug once it's left their body.
I wonder if it's because wasting, obviously sewage in rivers is very fashionable at the moment, isn't it? And it's been a big news item for the last couple of years, and I guess we're entering that season now. But of course, that untreated water is pumping much more waste chemicals and pharmaceuticals into the water as well. I don't think that's quite hit the consciousness in the same way.
No, I mean, you're completely right. One of the things we're trying to do is try and move the debate beyond just sewage.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
So, I mean, I mean, your comment about sewage putting in some of the biggest amounts of drugs, that's true for some medicines, but then you've got the sort of the treated wastewater is also sort of putting in quite a lot of chemicals. So even if the water companies sort of fix the overflows, we're still going to have quite high concentrations of some active ingredients.
Yeah, and that's been my take from some of the homework we've done on this is that the treatment is designed really around sewage, isn't it? It's not designed around chemicals really, and so quite a lot of that stuff passes through the filters and doesn't doesn't get touched really, or if it does, it's only a little bit.
Yeah, and it works really well for some substances. So we look for paracetamol in rivers, and when things are working properly, the levels of paracetamol are actually quite low, even though it's by far the biggest medicine used in the UK. But when the storm overflows kick in and the sewage is basically going around that treatment, all of a sudden up the concentrations go. Yet you've got other substances like metformin where it's not really removed much at all by wastewater treatment. So in a typical river, when again you haven't got the overflows, we'll be seeing greatest concentrations of metformin compared to other drugs.
So, Alistair, before we get into how to remove them, can we just go back literally upstream
Hmm.
and explain to the listener how is it that these chemicals are actually making it into our waters? I.e., let's talk excretion and egestion, and let's talk what about people put in their bins. Can you talk people through
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, I can certainly talk you through the process, and I think one thing that surprises me is when I talk to medics, they don't really make this link,
They
but
don't get it.
no, they do when you mention it. But yeah, I mean, when we take a drug, as you know, we're not all of that drug will be absorbed. So yeah, some will just pass straight through our body. That is absorbed, it might be metabolized, and then you might get excretion of the parent compound and the metabolite. But effectively, what you're getting is any unmetabolized drug plus the metabolites is being excreted from our body in our urine and feces, and that's going to go into the sewer system. And it is interesting when I talk to medics, they just don't make that link. I was at the dentist about 6 months ago, I was saying, well, I can tell when you're busy because I see lidocaine in the local river, and he's like, well, how does that work? And I had to talk him through the process, and he suddenly got it. So he's sort of forgetting his sort of, I guess, degree level pharmacology, but
Yeah, I guess that's where we would get it because we understand the kinetics, isn't it? So, but what about the bit where people have put it in their bins and such like as well? How does that make it into the rivers and the seas?
so I mean, obviously, some people will just throw it into the bins. In York, where I live, up until 5 years ago, I mean, what would happen to that waste is it would go to the local landfill. Um, and the leachate from that landfill site was actually piped to the wastewater treatment works. So if you get the disposed drug going into the landfill and it leaches, it's going to go into the leachate and it'll go into the landfills into the wastewater treatment works. So it's almost joining the stuff that's being excreted by the people who are taking the medicines. Now in York, we've got a waste to energy incinerator, so most of it will go there and be destroyed. But what we found actually is probably the emissions from medicine disposal is quite small. The biggest
Right.
contributor is the patient use.
So we and poo basically.
Yes, wee and poo is the big contributor, unless you've got a manufacturing site. So a lot of the manufacturing in the UK obviously is now done overseas in India and China. And there's sites in India where in rivers around the manufacturing areas, they've measured very, very high concentrations of some drugs. So ciprofloxacin, for example, there's a Swedish study that measured ciprofloxacin in the Hyderabad region of India in the manufacturing area, and they found a concentration in the water of 31 milligrams per litre. Now that, to put it into some perspective, if you were taking ciprofloxacin and I measured the concentration in your blood, it would be about 3 milligrams per litre. So, the level in the river was 10 times higher than the therapeutic dose, which is, when you think about AMR, quite scary.
I mean, that's really scary, isn't it? And I suppose before you start thinking about this in depth, you might be tempted to think the big problem is farmland and antibiotics from farmland. Is that, what's the balance? What's the sort of issue?
So in the UK, I think about 50% of the antibiotics that are used in the UK is used in farming and livestock treatment. It's an area that's been much less studied. So we have done work. It's where I started looking at veterinary medicines and veterinary antibiotics. But it's much more pulsy. So what you find is if pig slurry is being applied to a field as a fertilizer and those pigs have been treated with an antibiotic, what happens is the antibiotic will appear in the rivers as a spike when it rains soon after the pig slurry is spreading. Whereas the human medicines, obviously, we're as a society taking them continuously, so you've got this continuous environmental exposure. So you see this very, very sort of stark difference in terms of the exposure patterns of the two types of drugs. So in the veterinary area, it'll be quite peaky but very high concentrations, and then the human use drugs we see fairly persistent concentrations over time, but they'll be lower.
So, Alistair, you mentioned ciprofloxacin and maybe come back to the antimicrobial resistance bit in a minute, and you mentioned paracetamol, but what other medicines do you typically find most frequently or that appear to be most worrying?
So the most frequent sort of ingredients we detect, so we look typically, it varies. Our current suite, we do 60 to 70 active ingredients. Metformin is always the biggest. We find quite a lot of gabapentin.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, citalopram.
Is that because they're the commonly used drugs, which we know they are, or is that just because the way that they're excreted lends themselves to lots of the molecule going out of the body?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. So what really drives the high concentrations is if you've got a high dose drug that's widely used, that's not heavily metabolized and not removed in wastewater treatment, that's the substance that you'll find at the greatest amount. Whereas you move to the other extreme, if you've got something that's a very low dose, that's heavily metabolized, heavily removed in wastewater treatment, then you won't find much of it.
Or you're in an area with a lot of type 2 diabetics in pain.
Yeah.
I don't, though, as a clinician, I don't get the carbamazepine because we don't have many people on carbamazepine anymore.
I think this is one where there isn't a lot of removal,
right,
and it's quite persistent. So,
okay.
So it's not the highest. It sits in the middle, but it's one that we see, pretty much everywhere. There's certain drugs that we've monitored in UK rivers that we see everywhere, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I say that must be a persistence thing because seriously, we do not do many prescriptions for carbamazepine, and caffeine is the other one that in the pre-work that I did in relation to this. Is that just from what we're peeing out from our coffee and tea?
Yeah, and your Red Bulls.
Okay, so, yes, of course.
It's so I mean I think the pharmaceutical use of caffeine is a minor contributor.
Yeah.
So it's coming from these other sources. Same with nicotine and cotinine. Again, we find those quite regularly.
So if you're in London drinking, they say it's been through someone 7 times, don't they? If you're in London, something like that. What's on your mind? You're obviously in York, you're drinking fresh hill water, but what's on your mind in London? What are you worrying about when you're drinking that water? And is any of this going to actually do you any harm?
So we've done evaluations where we've sort of taken the concentrations we measure in river water. Have also done monitoring of a range of substances in drinking water, and then we sort of assumed that an individual will drink 2 liters of the water a day, and can then compare that with acceptable daily intakes. And our main conclusion from that is that to get anywhere near an ADI, you need to drink a lot of water. So I think the direct toxicological risks to humans, based on the data we've looked at, are quite low. We are, however, I think as a research community, that the thing that we are worried about, and it's a very difficult question to answer, is what is the potential impact of the very long-term low-level exposure to mixtures of these compounds. So we will be exposed to these substances from the day we're born to the day we die, and I don't think at the moment we really have the tools to answer the question, what does that do to human health? That's one of the big questions in the area.
Because we can certainly theorise it with antibiotics, but I suppose the rest is a bit more difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the antibiotics, that's a much clearer link to human health and the selection of AMR. But the direct toxicity is that's one that's very hard to characterise.
What's an ADI, Alistair?
That's an acceptable daily intake.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask that. As opposed to an API, which is an active pharmaceutical ingredient.
I thought you would know all these terminologies, but
we're public service broadcasting, Alistair, so we inform, educate, and entertain. So we have to let our listeners know.
So with the AMR, the antimicrobial resistance agenda, there's some really, I've heard you describe previously, there's some very practical things about potential transmission there from, while swimming obviously is very popular nowadays.
Don't swallow turds.
Yeah, sound advice. Yeah, don't drink yellow snow. So while swimming, surfers, there's some data on surfers as well. Is that correct, Alistair?
Yeah, there was a really interesting study led by the University of Exeter called the Beach Bums Survey, and they recruited a load of surfers and gave them swabs, and so basically characterized what was coming out of their bottoms in terms of resistance genes, and what they found, they had a sort of control cohort that didn't surf, and they found the surfers had this elevated level of antimicrobial resistance genes in their feces compared to the control group, and they sort of linked that to the sewage pollution of the beaches.
Yeah, so I heard that when you're not a stranger to podcasts, are you, Alistair? So you've been on the PJ pod. I also heard you on the Guardian Science pod, and they were talking about that study, and they were explaining, because I'm a wild swimmer, as you might call them, but they said that surfers swallow a lot more seawater, and that's why they chose them as their group. Yeah. So that's really interesting stuff, isn't it, in relation to antimicrobial resistance? And
can I just jump in, Alistair? Wild, he was livid. Sorry, carry on.
And the surfers probably go out. Steve's looking befuddled. That's a, for the younger listeners, that's a Not the 9 O'Clock News reference from about 40 years ago. But
Gerald the gorilla.
Yeah, that's okay. Right.
Couldn't resist it. Sorry.
You got me there. I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. I thought maybe it was an Alan Partridge that I'd missed.
Yeah, and Alistair, you mentioned when you about the stakeholders, you said you work, and look, we had Margaret McCartney on for the last guest of Series 7, so I'll channel my inner Margaret here. You said you work closely with the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. How close is that then? Are they funding this type of research themselves, or?
Yeah, so I mean we're involved in a big project at the moment, funded through the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is it's like a sort of public-private partnership program at the EU level, and the project's called Premier, And what it involves is we got, I think it's something like, it's over 20 partners. So half of them are research institutes like ourselves, and then you've got the pharma companies. So people like AstraZeneca, GSK, Novartis, yeah. So they're all part of Premier, and what we're trying to do in Premier is develop tools that can be used really to try and identify those active ingredients that are likely or potentially causing harm in the environment, so that they can then perhaps begin to think about how they could sort of fix the problem through perhaps developing sort of safer alternatives. So yeah, we work quite closely with the industry, and I have done now for 10 or 20 years. They've been quite heavily involved in the projects we've done.
So again, when I was listening to the PJ pod, the counter person to you was a guy called, I think he might not have been a professor, but I just couldn't help thinking of him as Professor Snape. And he was the AstraZeneca global head of environment. And his counter to you was, so what? We know that there are all these pharmaceuticals in the river. They're everywhere. So what? So that was quite a blunt challenge, I suppose, is the way I saw it. And we've talked about antimicrobial resistance. And I guess those of us that understand antimicrobial resistance would hypothesize that actually sounds quite important. But actually, on the other stuff, I am a little bit in Professor Snape's camp in so what? His point about, well, you can get your mass spectrometry out and you can find pretty much everything if you look hard enough for it. So is there anything else that you can give us in relation to effects on fish or anything else that we really should be worried about, as in the so what?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously up until now, we've focused mostly about on the human health impacts. But I think in terms of apart from the antibiotics, the main thing that I worry about in terms of impacts of pharmaceuticals in the environment is actually on organisms in the environment. So things like algal species, invertebrate species, fish species. And the reason for that is that I think it's something like 93% of the drug receptors that are targeted by pharmaceuticals that occur in humans occur in an organism in the environment. And what the concern is if we're emitting these drugs into the environment and they are accumulating these molecules, so they're accumulating in a different way than we do, because they'll be partitioning from the water into the body of the organism. You could be reaching levels that could be interacting with receptors and causing effects. And we do have we have examples from the laboratory where we see a whole range of effects of pharmaceuticals at the types of concentrations that we see in the environment. So the classic one is some of the estrogenic compounds. They've been shown at quite low concentrations to affect the sexual characteristics of fish. Going back to some of the antibiotic compounds, they don't just select for resistance. Some of them are very toxic to algal species. Those algal species are at the base of the food chain, so if you're affecting the sort of the base of the food chain, you could be affecting the food resource for things higher up the food chain. We know that some of the antidepressants are able to affect the behavior of fish, so they affect the way in which male and female fish interact. They affect the ways that certain invertebrates respond to light stimuli. They affect how mollusks stick to rocks. So we get these, some of them seem quite subtle effects, but a lot of them, if they're happening out in the real world, they could be very important in terms of survival of ecological populations and communities.
One of the things I read, I don't know how reliable it is, but was about it was here in South Wales, about the population of dippers, the bird, the dipper, and they feed on the algae that you're talking about. So the number and sizes of the dippers is almost a natural biological indicator of the state of the health of the river.
Yeah, and it's this sort of food chain effect, and I think sticking with the birds, it's quite some time ago. I don't remember the name of the study, but I think it was done in Wales, and it was looking at bird song around wastewater treatment works. and they were finding that the bird song was being altered compared to birds that weren't feeding from the wastewater treatment works. And one of the theories was that was potentially due to estrogenic compounds in the wastewater.
So what I wrote down when I was reading about this was signal to noise ratio. This idea that so there is all this noise, and it sounds like there's some good hypotheses here, but to prove something, you want the signal to noise, don't you, to be able to then really focus in on, yeah, this is really bad news, not just for, let's say, the animals in the river, but for the humans as well. And that, I guess, that's going to be the difficult bit, isn't it, of trying to move this forward?
Yeah, and the challenge we have is, I think pollution of a river is so complex. So a typical UK river isn't just going to have pharmaceuticals in the river, it's going to have personal care products. So things, preservatives from personal care products, some of the UV filters, it's going to have pesticides from the farming. And they're all going to also going to be contributing to the impact on the ecosystem. And teasing out the effects of the pharmaceutical from that complex mixture is really, really difficult. It's something that I don't think we've been able to do yet. It's something that we're working on. So we've got a big project at the moment trying to understand mixture interactions and use food web models to try and explore how mixtures of different chemicals, including pharmaceuticals, hit mixtures of species in the environment. And hopefully that will begin to give us an understanding of what could be happening in the real environment. And there's work where people are beginning to look at ecological monitoring data. So you get the Environment Agency do quite a lot of monitoring of invertebrates and fish. They also do diatom monitoring. So they look at the different species of diatoms in a river. And people have tried to sort of take that data and link that to pollution. And that the message coming out of that is that the health of UK rivers has increased. And some sort of say, yeah, that they're healthy, but I think while they're healthier, it doesn't mean they're healthy. So my suspicion is there's a handful of pharmaceuticals and a handful of other substances in UK rivers that are probably harming the ecology. And the secret is going to be trying to identify those and fix them. And it'll probably vary depending on where you are in the country.
So if you had a magic wand and lots of money, how would we actually go about removing them, from the systems? I understand, perhaps you could explain to the listener about this thing in Switzerland where apparently they've invested in removal. And is this true that they're trying to get pharma in the EU to pharma companies to take part in this using activated charcoal? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so in Switzerland they've introduced a treatment technology. It's called quaternary treatment. That can be done in different ways. So as you say, it can be done using activated carbon filters. So the idea is that will absorb the pharmaceuticals and other pollutants before they get out into the environment.
Just like what we used to give people who had taken an overdose, we'd give them activated charcoal to adsorb the chemical. So yeah, I was interested in that. Sorry to interrupt.
I think they used to sell it on EasyJet flights as well.
Or that would have been really pricey, I would
Do you
think.
remember that? I think there was a sachet that you could get.
It helps settle the stomach, doesn't it?
It's also in wind cheaters. If you fart too much, activated charcoal is a very, very interesting compound.
Yeah, I forgot. Yes, I forgot what we were saying, but I think it. So we got the GAC as one approach. The other is there's sort of chemical oxidation methods like using ozone.
Yeah. Ozone.
So,
Wow.
and these methods are very good at removing some of the more recalcitrant pharmaceuticals, and they're having quite a lot of success in Switzerland. There is a negative, so financially they cost a lot of money. They also have an environmental cost themselves, so you get greater greenhouse gas emissions. But that is one solution. Whether it's the right solution, I think it perhaps is the right solution in certain situations. I think in some situations, so we did some work in the national parks, looking at pharmaceutical pollution in the national parks, where we found some very high levels. In that type of situation, you're probably not going to want to put in a sort of a heavy engineering approach like that, but maybe a more natural approach and more sort of a wetland type system might be appropriate in that type of situation. And then I think we perhaps need to be looking upstream. So in the longer term, if we can identify what are the really ecologically harmful active ingredients, can we change those? So what we call benign by design pharmaceuticals. Can we change the way they're used? So maybe as we move to sort of new technologies like personalized medicines, that could perhaps result in lower emissions to the environment. And then changing prescriber and user practice. So so we don't produce as much waste medicine. So I think there's lots of things we can do, and we probably need a combination of those approaches.
Loving that. That takes us back to the Tracy Lyons episode 3.6 about planetary health. And again, I work with Tracy. She works here with me in Dorset. And I always think of Tracy when we're thinking about environment and stuff. And I wrote down, what would Tracy say? She would say probably something like, don't prescribe if it's not needed. Don't request it if you're not taking it. And if you're going to dispose of it properly. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds really good. And the planetary
The
health
3Ds.
thing. Yeah, it's interesting you raised the planetary health thing. One thing I've been working on over the summer, with a few people around the world is, have you come across the Earth system boundaries?
No.
Is that a new film on Netflix?
Well, there probably will be a film soon. It's one of the.
Is Keira Knightley in it?
Not yet. But yeah, the Earth system boundaries. It started off as the concept was the planetary boundaries, and it came out of the Stockholm Resilience Centre, this concept. And basically, what they've defined is a number of boundaries for the planet for different things like climate change, biodiversity loss, and the idea is if we keep within that boundary, then the planet will be okay. But if we exceed that boundary, then it's not good for the planet. Now, recently, what they've done is they've introduced a new boundary, which is called novel entities. So that includes chemicals and microplastics. And people are beginning to say, well, actually, they think we're exceeding the planetary boundary for novel entities. So over the summer, we've been working to sort of try and think about pharmaceuticals and whether pharmaceuticals and pharmacy is contributing to the transgression of this Earth system boundary, which has been a very interesting exercise. I mean, we've concluded that it probably is contributing to the exceedance of the boundary, and we've sort of tried to sort of, based on that, put some ideas forward on what we should do as a global society to sort of deal with the problem.
The Oral Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and OneLessPill.com.
Very good. Should we move on to the highlight of coming on the Oral Apothecary podcast, Alistair?
Yeah, fascinating stuff, Alistair. Really wish we were in the pub, quite literally. It would be fascinating to carry on this conversation. So, yes, hopefully you're aware that by agreeing to come on, you get to give us 3 things. So the first is a desert island drug. So this is a medicine or a pharmaceutical, in your case, perhaps, that evokes a powerful memory for you. So what would you like to offer the Oral Apothecary formulary?
Yeah, so I've given this one a little bit of thought. There were 2 initial ones. So the first was ivermectin, which is a drug that I've done. Obviously, it's used primarily, well, it was primarily used as a veterinary drug, but has uses as a human medicine as well. And I think during COVID, it scared me a little that it could be used more widely. So it's a drug that I've done a lot of work on. Very toxic. So it's probably one of the most ecotoxic, if not the most ecotoxic chemical I've ever come across. So we work with when we do a lot of these testing, one of the standard organisms we use is the water flea, Daphnia magna. And the way that we test toxicity of these chemicals is we do a concentration response sort of for Daphnia as well as a fish and an algae, and you come up with the the concentration that causes 50% effect. So you're looking at mortality effectively. So it's equivalent to a tox study, not a rat tox study where you do an LD50, we just do the Daphnia.
Lethal dose, yeah.
Yeah, and the ivermectin has it has a lowest observed effect concentration of, I think it's 10 picograms per liter. So it's
Ooh, that's a small number.
very, very small. Yeah, and we can't even measure that. It's so low.
Practically homeopathy, isn't it?
Yeah. So
Wow, that just shows the potency of the stuff, doesn't it? We've actually started using that in humans, I'm afraid, for resistant scabies quite a lot, and have had more than one patient, and there's a lot of it on the internet, about people saying that, oh, I've got cancer, and I've read that ivermectin plus fomepizole, which is also an anti-worming agent used in veterinary medicine, is going to save me.
yeah, and I got quite concerned when during COVID there was talk about using ivermectin, because if everyone started using ivermectin, it could have been an ecological disaster, and no one really talked about that. But that's not the one that I chose.
That's not your choice. That's not
Oh
your
my
choice.
word.
Come on.
Oh my
Second
word.
one, so it's a long-winded answer this. The second one is diclofenac. So we can't have this conversation without mentioning diclofenac and the vultures.
I think we've been here before, yeah.
Yeah,
Our listeners
yeah.
have been here before.
But I think the one that I've gone for is actually the one that sort of, I think, started me on this road. And it's one you may not have heard of. It's a substance called phalmamulin, which is an antibiotic. It's a plurimutilin derivative. So it's a veterinary drug. And when I started my first job, I worked at the Water Research Centre. And one of the tasks I was given was a little bit of consultancy for Novartis to do. I think it was one of the first environmental risk assessments on a veterinary drug in Europe on the valmamulin, and they allowed me to publish it as a paper. So we published it, and without that study, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today, because that sort of, I think, set me off as one of the first people looking at pharmaceuticals in the environment. So valmamulin is my choice.
Right.
Definitely not in there.
Yeah, that's definitely not been had before, so that can definitely go straight
I
in.
had a guess it wouldn't be.
Our main conversation about veterinary medicine is how much of a rip-off it is, which has recently been confirmed by the government, hasn't it?
Yeah, we led the way with pets and pills, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
The side story there is Novartis had a big launch of this drug, and as part of that, they had they really pushed it at one of the veterinary pharmacology conferences in Madrid. So they flew me business class out to Madrid. So I was really young at the time. I'd never flown business class.
Well, this is how they groom you, Alistair, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
So come on. Yeah.
This is the conflict of interest
Yeah,
question
yeah.
from earlier.
Yeah.
But the night before my talk, I mean, you know how it works in Spain. The night before my talk was the conference party,
Yeah,
which finished at 6 o'clock in the morning, and
6
my
a.m.,
talk
yeah.
was at 10 o'clock, and I was not in a good state for the talk. And I
You
was
don't work for them anymore, do you?
I don't work for them. I work with them.
Very good. Okay, well, you can definitely have valnamulin.
Namulin, yes.
Great, thank you so much for that. All right, the second choice is a career anthem for the Oral Apothecary Spotify playlist. What would you like to give us?
Yeah, so I came up with a few here. So I started off with Britney Spears' Toxic, which I'm sure you've not had.
That wouldn't be allowed in, actually.
Would it not?
Brittany,
I love that song.
Then, because I spend quite a lot of my time hanging off bridges, sampling rivers, I thought Bridge Over Troubled Water might be a good one. But then we also use buckets, so I was wondering whether Harry Belafonte and Adetta with There's a Hole in My Bucket.
O'Neill from the Young Ones did a version of that.
No, it's a shoe, I think.
Oh yes, it was. Sorry.
You've really given this a lot of thought, Alistair.
I have. I've been working at it for weeks, so I've ended up with two, and I thought I would
you
decide.
can only have one.
Yeah. So the first option was Groove Armada at the river, and then the second one was Bruce Springsteen, the river, and I think I'm going to go for Groove Armada because it's just such a cool.
Teased us with Springsteen, and then
Yeah, we've had Springsteen before, but I love a bit of Groove Armada.
Yeah,
I can see our
brilliant.
fifth apothecary holding his head in his hands. See, look, Jonathan loves a bit of Bruce.
So, Groove Armada. What was the name of the track?
At the river. It's the one where you got sand dunes and salty air, which I'm not sure what has.
Yes.
I don't really know what that's got to do with rivers, but
It's probably got something to do with illicit pharmaceuticals, I would think. Okay, moving on. Excellent. Groove Armada will sound great. And yes, it really is on Spotify. And the third thing, Alistair, is a book for the Oral Apothecary Library.
yeah. And so, if you were to guess what I'd choose, what would you guess?
The encyclopedic knowledge of active pharmaceutical ingredients by A.B.
No, that's wrong. So the one that I've chosen is certainly in our field, I think, regarded as the classic, which is Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which is so I'm usually used to reading Andy McNab, so I'm not a great reader. I could go for Andy McNab, but I think this one's probably more appropriate. So Silent Spring is, I think it's the book that probably most ecotoxicologists would sort of come up with. And I think while it's a very heavy and depressing read, I think what's really interesting is when you read it, there's so much in it that's actually picking up the things that we as a research community are addressing today. It was quite visionary.
So it's quite an old book, is it? Or
1962 it was published, and it was all about DDT and the impacts of DDT and the other sort of really persistent pesticides. But it talks about things like metabolism and the effects of metabolites. It talks about food web effects. It talks about ecological effects on human health. There's so much of the things that we think are new today that are mentioned in that book. And I think what's quite sad is we're still making the same mistakes today as we were making back then. We don't seem to really learn as a society.
Wow, that sounds iconic then, as you say, in relation to your field. And as ever, whenever we think that we come up with a new idea, actually it's not new at all, and we've just rediscovered something that somebody thought about and articulated many, many years before. So Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Excellent.
Good thought
Really
gone
thoughtful
into those.
choices. Thank you, Alistair.
Yeah, very good. Let's just continue the conversation for a little bit further, Alistair, and then we will let you be on your way. We won't have a full-blown micro-discussion and reach those dizzy heights, but you mentioned it just before your choices about the work in the English national parks. Can you just explain to us what was the point of difference you were looking for in that study, and just give the listener a bit of background to what you did and what you found?
So that came about it's really as a result of the global study that we did. So the global study, as you mentioned at the start, we'd looked at 104 countries, and that was probably the first study of its kind, I would say, looking at organic chemical pollution of rivers around the world. And I was contacted, I will name them, by the Telegraph, who were really interested in the study, and they're saying we'd like to do something on UK rivers and on pharmaceuticals, but they said our readers aren't really interested in urban rivers. It'd be good to get a slightly different niche, and we came up with this idea of looking at national parks. So I went away. I costed how much it cost them to do, gave them the quote, and I never heard from them again. So, but anyway, we thought, well, that's a really interesting question. So we did it with the Rivers Trust, and we thought, let's do it anyway. And we managed to convince a number of the local rivers trusts around national parks in England to go out and sample rivers across the national parks. So we tried to identify rivers where we knew there was like a wastewater input. And they went out on 2 occasions. It was back in 2022. So we went in the winter. So that was during one of the heavy storm periods. So I think it's Storm Eunice. So there's a lot of rain and a lot of water flow at these sites. And then we did the same in the summer in August when there was quite dry periods, so very low flow. And I think what was really fun about the study was, well, we got to go to some really, really nice places, which I don't usually get to go to. So I was sampling in the Dales, in the Moors, in the Peak District. But the results were fascinating. So we found some of these rivers were actually more polluted than some of the rivers in London or York or Leeds. And that just doesn't. You think, why is that? These are places that you'd imagine would be pristine, but when you begin to think about it, you realise that the wastewater treatment plants in some of these areas are very old. They're very low tech. So if you go walking in a national park, just look out and look for the wastewater treatment works, and quite often you'll see these dilapidated things. So that's one issue. The other issue is tourists. So you get a lot of tourists going to national parks. They'll be carrying with them the drugs that they've taken, and they'll be excreting them when they go to the pub and then go to the toilet. So if you
Or
go
weeing on the
somewhere
land when they get caught
or
short.
peeing in exactly. But go somewhere like Malham. I went to Malham last year. In the summer, you get massive numbers of tourists go at the weekend into Malham, and that's it's a tiny little wastewater treatment works. So you got all of this wastewater hitting that works. And then the other reason is a lot of these things are sort of in the upper reaches of rivers, so the flows are quite low. So even though you've got maybe even when you haven't got the tourists there, you've got fairly small villages and towns. You haven't got much dilution, so you haven't got the big rivers to dilute the chemicals. So yeah, Tideswell was the worst. It was a little beck just downstream of Tideswell in the Peak District. And of all the sites we've monitored across the UK, that was the second most polluted in terms of pharmaceuticals. And that's a site of special scientific interest. So ecologically, it's very special.
The Telegraph really missed out, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And but the Guardian got it, and that led to one of the podcasts that you mentioned.
I suppose that brings us full circle to the talk about sewage right at the beginning, isn't it? The big issue here is infrastructure, isn't it? In terms of, a growing population, creaking. I know it's not about sewage, but what we haven't got is a modern water treatment system, have we? And that's probably part of the answer here.
Yeah, and I think in Europe they've just introduced an update to one of the directives. So it's called the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So this is the thing that sort of controls in mainland Europe, and in the UK at the moment, emissions from wastewater treatment works. So that's just been updated, and one of the changes is that there's a list of pharmaceuticals that will need to be treated by some of the bigger wastewater treatment plants to meet the updated directive. It also starts considering AMR, so resistance is part of it. But it's not at all clear whether UK government are going to adopt the changes. It would be good if they do. That will then mean that as a country we might move more towards the Swiss example that you talked about a moment ago. But we're not really clear whether that's going to happen or not. I mean, I think we should be going beyond that and doing things more cleverly. But yeah, that's the situation we're in.
And the message to people about when I talked before about the Ds, the 3 Ds, but the dispose safely, I think the answer to that is if you've got any left over that you're not taking, you're supposed to take it back to your local community pharmacy, who then have the proper contracts to have it dealt with in the most appropriate way. Is that correct?
That's right. And most of that material I think all of that material will go to hazardous waste disposal. So that will go to a special incinerator. And yeah,
Don't mention the carbon to Tracy.
Before we finish, Alistair, what on the Pharmaceutical Journal podcast, which was 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't it? They mentioned some work in Scotland with, I think, Sharon Flegler and a PhD student looking at hospitals trying to, look after their own waste water and take out the contaminants before it went to the treatment works itself. And they were talking about nanotechnology. So we're 3 or 4 years on. Have you any update or understanding of where we are with that type of intervention?
I think there's a lot of those types of interventions being used, and I know Sharon and her team have I think they've moved things massively ahead up in Inverness. I think it's really changed the way that they use and prescribe and sort of say treat drugs in the Inverness area. I don't know whether it's had a measurable impact. Something that I've not really followed in the last year or so. But Sharon would be a really good person to get on to this, because she is so good.
One of the things they talked about, wasn't it, was they had filters on at source, didn't they? They were filtering the hospital the water directly as it come out of the hospital, and I guess that's a potential solution. Is that we all start peeing into a filter or having filters closer to home or something like that.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think if you're in a situation where the population of the hospital makes up a large proportion of the wastewater, then that is going to have a big effect. If you're in a bigger city, like somewhere like, York isn't big, but with 220,000 people, the effect on if the hospital put in some form of treatment, the effect on the wastewater would probably be quite difficult to measure, particularly given a lot of patients are going to get the medicine and then go home or excrete it at home. There is some really cool stuff though on the hospital side. So, and I'm not sure whether any of the UK hospitals have adopted it yet, but the unit Delft, the hospital in Delft in the Netherlands, they developed something called the pharma filter, and this was basically an integrated waste and wastewater management system for the hospital, and it was really clever. So it was everything, even like the bedpans. They redesigned the bedpan to a sort of protect the nurses. So if a patient was being treated with cytotoxic medicines, apparently handling the bed, you probably know this much more than I do, but handling the bedpan is apparently quite dangerous from a health and safety side of things. So they redesigned the bedpan so that as soon as it was used, it was closed. The bedpan was recyclable, and they had these little waste repositories on the wards that they would just throw it into, and it would send it down a system. It would separate everything out. It would send the liquid stuff to a wastewater treatment process that was done on the hospital, which I think included GAC. It recovered things like plastics and the metals
GAC?
and recycled them. Yeah, I had the GAC, I think.
What's that, sorry? GAC?
The granular activated carbon.
Thank you.
So that's the stuff,
Wind
we were talking
cheaters.
about earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's called the pharma filter. It's really, really clever. And at the time, they were sort of saying that there were hospitals elsewhere in Europe and the world that were looking to adopt this.
Very good. Okay, a big thank you to Alistair for joining us on the Oral Apothecary and for sharing his stories, his Desert Island Drug, his career anthem, and his book for the Oral Apothecary Library. Coming up next time, well, it's that time of year again. It'll be the Oral Apothecary Almanac. Join us next time on the Oral Apothecary. You can contact us via X at Oral Apothecary. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Gimmo now with a final ingredient.
Do we want to mention the conference at the Bennett Institute as well? Because I think when this goes out, there will still be time to come and see us do our live show. That's right, isn't it? If I got my timing right. Yeah. So we're doing a live show at the Bennett Institute conference in Oxford, which is a medicine symposium looking at data and medicines. And so yeah, it'd be good to see you there. So thank you, Alistair. That was fantastic. I as Steve said, I think that was one we could talk about all night. And I'm going to continue on a similar theme with today's final ingredient, and we may well have covered this. So we'll see how it goes, and we've got the expert in the room who may correct me. But today's story starts at a bus stop. A woman in Richmond, London, was recently fined £150 for pouring the last of her latte down a drain before hopping onto the bus. She was fined under the Environmental Protection Act, which makes it an offence to dispose of waste in a way likely to pollute land or water. And so this apparently covers pouring liquids into street drains as well. So the fine was later rescinded, but it begs an important question. Can a splash of coffee really harm the environment? Well, it'd be no surprise based on today's discussion that the answer is yes. We might in fact be caffeinating our rivers. And so the UK drinks 98 million cups of coffee a day. So individually it's just a sip and a pickup, but those leftover dregs, the ones poured down sinks and drains, don't just carry caffeine, they carry coffee, milk, sugars, organic compounds that all slip into the sewer systems. And so, as we've heard, wastewater treatment can remove some of it, but not all, and studies have found caffeine in over half of the world's rivers. It doesn't break down easily, it lingers, changing the metabolism and growth of tiny plants, algae, and even aquatic larvae, as we've discussed. So, sadly, think of it as nature's unintended espresso shot, creating rivers that might never sleep. And I'm sorry, Jamie, I know you like your decaf, but that doesn't help much. Coffee itself lowers pH, steals oxygen as it decomposes, and feeds those algal blooms and chokes aquatic life. So next time you're about to tip that cappuccino down the drain, remember that little splash of coffee could be keeping the local trout awake at night.
You have been listening to a 3 Apothecaries production. Sound engineer Jimbo Slough, original music Jamie Brewster, artwork by David Baker and Jacob Howard.
Thanks for listening to the Oral Apothecary Podcast. Warning, may colour urine.
This episode of the Oral Apothecary is sponsored by onelesspill.com, a medicines optimization consultancy.